Well, guys, we're coming up on 20,000 subs. I think I'm about 40 subs short right now of that, so I figure let's just make the all about me video, or the about me video, whatever you want to call it, and that way you guys can know a little more about who I am and where I come from. Now, I've realized in the past I'm not very good about talking about myself and covering everything, so what I'm going to do is just tell you guys, like I said, my beginnings and how I kind of got to where I am now. And I would like if you guys would just ask me questions in the comments. We'll kind of turn this into an AMA in the comments, and then I will answer those in a future video. But if we're going back to the beginning, I think we need to really go back to the beginning. So I'm going to take a little page out of Nintendo's book real quick, and let's do this. Switch! Yeah, guys, we're back. So I know a lot of you guys kind of labeled this like couch era, or CE, back when I was recording on this couch. It's kind of moved around since then. But I figured if we're going to do something where I talk about my beginnings, I figure we'll go back to the thing that I started on in YouTube, which was this. So first things first, my full name is Jonathan Downey. I usually cut off the rest of it and just leave it as John Downey. You guys probably saw that in my tech teardown for the PS4 where my username was displayed. And that's fine. I really don't mind if people know what my name is. It's not a big deal. And starting off, I grew up over here. You'll see a map. I grew up in Newark, Delaware, which is, if you know Delaware, it's not a place where a lot of stuff happens. In fact, it's the second smallest state in the continental U.S., next to Rhode Island. And I was very fortunate to grow up in a house that had actually a fair bit of technology at the time. Now, keep in mind, this is in the late 80s, early 90s. I was born in 1987. So at that time, computers weren't really like widely available to the point where they are now, where we have like Windows 10 or Windows 7 and everybody kind of knows how to use it. But back then we kind of lived in not the nicest house in the world. It was like a one-story rancher. We eventually did move, but that wasn't until I was about 10. So my early years were spent in this house where my dad was constantly moving between jobs that dealt with technology. So he did a lot of computer stuff where he would program for them, and he would do web design, and he would move between companies. Like MBNA was really big here for a while before that folded, and then he moved around, eventually finding a contract position that really kept him moving to different places. Now he's kind of gotten to a point where he can work at a very stable job, and, you know, he worked for a good bit at the beginning of his life really hard, and he did get to where he is now through hard work, so that's a good thing. It just shows that hard work pays off. But the beginning of our life, like I said, when I was born, they were pretty young. My parents weren't like old or anything. They were like in their early 20s. And just being in your early 20s without a kid can be hard, especially if you're just out of college and you just moved into a house and you're trying to make ends meet. It's not easy, but I will say my parents always tried to keep things as smooth as possible around me, even if my dad had left a job to go to another one, and with all the stress that happens there, going on interviews, which I know he went on a lot of interviews. And, you know, it's not easy, but they always made it work. I always had good Christmases, you know, they always made sure I was happy. I had, you know, stuff for school when it came around. I always had new clothes and everything. So they took care of me. I didn't have, like, a bad life in the beginning or anything like that, despite us not having a ton of money. But the one advantage that I always had as a kid was there was always a computer around, like, always. My dad always needed a computer for work, so I had my first experiences with a desktop computer much earlier than a lot of people did, especially in the early 90s. And from there, it was just computers all the time. We always got new computers. We were one of the first places that had like solid dial-up internet in my neighborhood. And eventually moved to where we had 2 phone lines because one needed to be specifically used for dial-up. Because back then, if you got a phone and you wanted to call someone, you would kick the person off from dial-up. My dad always had to be working for people at jobs, so he always had to be connected. We had 2 phone lines at one point. But my first real experience with opening a console was actually with the original Nintendo. Now, really quick backstory, I was always a generation behind. It was easier for my parents, I think, to get me cheaper systems because I was still pretty young. Now, parents now, if you have a 4 or 5-year-old and they want to get into games, you're probably not going to buy them an Xbox One or a PS4 because it doesn't make sense. You're going to get them like an Xbox 360 that's cheap, you know, and let them get started with that. So my parents would always get me like a Nintendo when the Super Nintendo was out, the Super Nintendo when the N64 was out, but I did eventually catch up to it when the 64 was out, and I remember I got a 64 with Pokemon Snap at Christmas time. And that's kind of how it was. I always had to wait for Christmas to come around to get these systems, because my parents didn't really buy us anything outside of Christmas time, which is probably a good thing, because I think a lot of kids that get that now tend to end up being spoiled as they get older, and now I look back on, I'm glad my parents did not do that, because I didn't always expect stuff like this. So my first real experience with the NES, my brother had put coins in the Nintendo, and it was rattling around, and I was worried that it was not going to work, so I had this thought in my head, well, what if we just open it and get the coins out? Because even if the lid opened, you couldn't get them out of there. They somehow went behind the black plastic underneath and were rattling around just in general. And I was like, okay, well, what if we get this thing apart? And again, I'm like 5 or 6 years old here. I'm a pretty little guy still. I'm like, well, what if we could get it apart? Wouldn't that make it work then? In my mind, I'm like trying to get the lid off. I'm trying to pull it off kind of with my little hands, you know. And I eventually figure out, with the help of my dad, that you need a screwdriver is what he would call it. I didn't know what that was. And he showed me that it's a Phillips head. And eventually him and I we worked it out and we opened it up. It took us way longer than it should have because he was trying to get me to do it. And eventually the lid comes off and like 3 pennies and a dime fall out. And that was my first real look into an NES and my first actual time of opening a console. And of course, when the lid's open, I get a look at all the stuff inside, and it just kind of fascinated me at the time. You know, you see all the stuff in there. I'm pretty little. I don't understand anything. And it was really cool. We didn't go any further than that. He actually put the lid back on. It ended up working fine. It probably would have worked with the coins in there, to be honest, because I doubt they were sitting anywhere that would have affected it. But it was pretty cool to open it up for the first time, especially now I look back on it now with what I've done in the past couple years. So we're going to jump forward. I keep upgrading computers. So my dad keeps getting computers. People keep trashing computers. At that time, computers were moving so fast. I mean, innovation was left and right. It was all over the place. And I kept upgrading my computers because people kept throwing out their Hewlett-Packards or their Packard Bells or their Gateways. And I just kept getting new systems because there was this game I really wanted to play that I got for Christmas that was Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2. Some of you guys might remember that if you're a little older. And I loved that game, but I needed a better computer. At the time, I was sitting with, I want to say, a 90 megahertz computer. And I remember I got upgraded to a 133 megahertz computer. I think it was a Pentium 1 at the time. And it worked great. So I was really fortunate to keep getting computers. I was consistently on the computer figuring things out. Eventually, I did get into opening one up to upgrade RAM because I was at 32 megs of RAM and I ended up upgrading to 64 megs, which was a big deal at the time. And from there, it was just interest in computers constantly. And when I was 10 years old, so fast forward a little bit, when I'm 10 years old, we end up moving from that smaller house in Brookside over in Newark, Delaware. We end up moving a little further out, about 15 to 20 minutes away, to Elkton, Maryland. So I jumped the line, we go into Maryland. The house is much larger. It's like a 2-story house with a basement, which is good because we had, at that time, I had myself, my 2 brothers, and then my parents. There were 5 of us living in a smaller house. So they jump us there, the schools are better, everything worked out well, and from there, it really started taking off to where I got my N64 one Christmas. I think at this point my dad had a better job, so I think that's why this stuff started to work out better. I get an N64 one Christmas, I get a GameCube one Christmas, I get a PS1 one Christmas, I get a Dreamcast, so it was like every Christmas I would get a new game console, and that really got me into games heavily. Like, I really loved my N64, I loved my PS1 for, like, the RPGs, and Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 will pretty much always be in my memory as the game that I played a lot on that PS1. And then we got to a point where I needed a new computer. I remember I really, really, really wanted a custom-built computer. Now, my birthday is 3 days after Christmas, so I always wrote my birthday off as I'm probably not getting the best gifts because no one really has a lot of money after Christmas. My parents always made it work. So if I got like a game console for Christmas, I would get a game for that game console on my birthday, and it worked out well. So my freshman year in high school, this was probably 2002. I remember I asked my dad, I was like, I really want a custom computer for Christmas. I want something I can build on down the road. Because up to this point, I have been doing nothing but upgrading pre-builds constantly, and I really wanted to get a system that I can build on down the road. Upgrade video cards, processors, RAMs, all that good stuff. And you know what? My dad did it. I think the night before, so Christmas Eve, I have a feeling he was upstairs building this thing because he disappeared for a good part of it. And whether he was building the whole thing or he was putting RAM in that he just got or something. And I remember, I think it was an AMD, I think it was like a 3800 plus dual-core processor, 256 megs of, I have to imagine, DDR1. It might have been DDR2 RAM. And it was an NVIDIA GeForce 5200 FX card, and at the time, that thing had 256 megs of VRAM, so that thing was flying. And of course, loaded up with Windows XP, the newer operating system, and I was off and running. And computer gaming at that point always fascinated me. I loved computer games. I loved just trying out new hardware. So I remember at one point I got a 6800, moved to an 8800, and then I kept moving video cards as I got money for it. But then in high school, I remember I tried out programming. I did not like programming at all. I really didn't. I thought it was very boring. I remember I tried Java, I tried True Basic, And I did it, but it just wasn't interesting to me. I was always more interested in the hardware aspects, taking stuff apart, IT work, I guess you'd call it. But there's just not a lot of jobs out there for that. I mean, yes, you can get like probably a corporate position somewhere where they'll keep you in the basement, much like they do in the sitcom, the IT Crowd. And it's not a bad job. It really isn't. It doesn't end up paying well, though. If you want to get in IT, I would do it more as a hobby and look into something like cybersecurity, where the pay's better, because there's not a lot of room for growth in IT in terms of actually building a very good living overall. Now, I'm not saying you can't build a living on it. I'm just saying right now, if you really need to look into it, there's probably better options if you're just starting out. So after high school, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. I remember this. I was not sure. I went to college. There was a community college near me I went to. I ended up getting so bored because I remember I went there for accounting. And man, if you go for accounting, make sure you like accounting because it becomes so boring over time. I remember I never wanted to go to class because it just wasn't fun. It wasn't interesting. I would kind of go through the motions when I was there. And I ended up leaving college. I never finished college, and I should have. Now I look back on it because my parents were nice enough to at least pay for it while I was starting out, and I probably could have at least gotten out of there with a 2-year degree. I probably still could go back and finish my 2-year degree because I think I finished a little over a year's worth of college and credits and everything, so I could have at least got my 2-year degree. I've always considered going back just to finish it and say I have it done and get some degree and whatever, but at this point, especially with how I'm doing with YouTube now, I just wouldn't have the time anyway. But at least the option's always open, and I can always go back and try to finish. They do still have my credits on file, because at one point I was very close to going back, and they still have everything. So maybe there's a chance I go back and finish with something even in general studies just to get it done. But during my time in college, I ended up getting a job at GameStop, which was really cool. I liked a lot of the people there. One of my recent live chats, or live streams, one of my old manager from GameStop came on and talked to me, and that was a really fun job, mostly because of the people. Now, GameStop in general is not the most glamorous job in the world. For some reason, people see that as an awesome job, like you go there and you play games all the time. No, it's far from that. It really is. It's like if you worked anywhere else, but there's games around you. And like I said, some people like that. It wasn't always bad. They let you rent out games, check them out, take them home, play them for 3 days, bring them back. Great. But it is a corporate job. You do always have that corporate memo coming down from the higher-ups yelling at you about something. Not enough pre-orders, not enough subscriptions. This part of the store didn't look as good as it should have. There's always something they're beating you over the head about. And if you don't have people you like there, like friends or people you can have a good conversation with, it can be pretty boring. Like, there's not a lot that happens. Some nights, a lot of customers don't come in, and you end up just standing there staring at the wall or trying to do... They would call them all kinds of stuff where you have to put stuff in boxes and send them to other places, other stores. And you'd have to do defectives. It really was not a fun job. If you're looking into GameStop, I wouldn't look into it as like a career, because a lot of the people that try to do that end up leaving. So I get towards the end of my job at GameStop, and another store pops up and contacts me. I end up going in there. I put a resume in anyway just to see if they would want to hire me. And they see that I have some knowledge about computers, and they end up contacting me, asking me if I'd like to come in and apply and have the job. And I said, sure, I would, because they offered me more money than I was making at GameStop at the time. So I leave GameStop. I kind of, it was a long build until then. I remember I ended up not showing up right away for the job because it was a little off-putting when I went there the first time. They were still building the place. And eventually my mom found it again on Craigslist. I go there again, I apply, and the place is pretty much done, and they hire me. So it worked out really well there. I ended up going there. I worked there. It was a store called GamerDoc. I ended up working there from 2009 till pretty recently, actually, when I left there. And that's where I learned a lot about consoles, electronics, and how to fix them. So the store itself was like a video game store, but they also did retro stuff, computer repair, and game console repair. And we had our technician. He wasn't very good. He would show up when he wanted to, and he sometimes would not even bring the consoles back because he would repair them off-site. So we did the one thing we could come up with. We learned how to fix them. One of my friends there, Evan, actually had some experience fixing 360s with another company, so he started showing me how to fix them, and from there I got really interested, so I started trying to learn and teach myself. And eventually I come out the other end knowing how to fix everything. 360s, PS3s, Wiis, computers. I mean, I'm fixing motherboards on computers. I teach myself how to do tons of soldering. I mean, the amount of soldering I have done in my life so far is probably more than most people will ever do in their life. I mean, while I'm there, I learned how to reball consoles, which involves actually soldering and heating up the chip to the point where it comes off the board, removing the solder on the board with a solder wick and iron, putting it back together after putting new solder balls on. It became pretty intensive there with the repairs. So I was pretty happy with all the stuff I learned there. You guys have probably watched some of my tech waves where I take stuff apart. That was a daily thing for me there. I would take stuff apart all the time. I mean, the amount of PS3s I've probably fixed is definitely in the hundreds, and it could even be leading up to the thousands, depending on, you know, if we're including everything with 360s, PS3s, and Wiis. And then I decided that with one of my friends, I wanted to create a website that dealt with, like, video games and stuff. And I've always wanted to get into video game journalism. I always have. I've always wanted to report on it. I've always wanted to review games. There's always been stuff I've wanted to do with that. And I know a lot of people want to do it, but I've always been more about trying to do it and really just focusing heavily on it and getting it done. And it never worked out because, believe it or not, guys, these websites, these gaming ones, as basic as they may look to most people that go to them, they require obscene amounts of work if it's just one person. You probably need at least a team of 8 to 10 people to really push on it to make it work. I mean, you have to constantly update, and you're writing tens of thousands of words probably a day if you want to keep it going, and it's tough. Not to mention, guys, the first couple months you're doing it, a lot of people aren't even visiting the website. You have to really pound the pavement online and move around just to get people to even visit your site in the first place. So it didn't work out. We tried. It just didn't work. We tried doing a podcast. Didn't work. So I remember I eventually got into YouTube. I made this account, Spawnwave Media. One of my friends actually said, hey, you've tried it so much, this is almost like a rebirth for you. Why don't you just call it Spawnwave? And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. Let's do it. So I named it Spawnwave. I started posting because I remember I didn't really want to be on camera at first. I wanted to do what a lot of people do, which is put slides up or gameplay footage up and then talk over it. And you know what? I was like, man, everybody does that. Why don't I do something different and just get on camera, try to make the production a little better, and show off some of my knowledge that I have for computers and game consoles. And instead of, like I said, make it so you guys watch gameplay, why don't I actually try to make it so it's a little more personal back and forth? You guys see who I am, and we can actually have a nice conversation about this. So my first real video that really jumped was the argument I had against people complaining about 4 gigs of RAM on the Switch not being enough. I said it was, because it is. Obviously, go look at the games. They look fine. Handheld mode, they work fine. Zelda looks good. And from there, I was like, cool, I want to talk about technology. But the one thing I've always wanted, and I've always wanted to do this, I've always wanted to do a news show on video games. Like how you tune into CNN, for example, and they always just talk about just dumb stuff, like all the time. And it might not even be true. And it might be about something terrible, but it's so small it shouldn't be blown up as much as they do. I just wanted to make a video game talk show or just a news show where you guys can tune in and you can see the news that's happening in video games and the video game world. So I took that and I created Newswave. It's been getting better and better as I do it, and it's really cool. I see a really cool future for Newswave. I would love to make it like an actual like news show that you tune into. I would even like to eventually get it to the point where I could live stream it, like actually have a live stream and then download it and cut it up and put it up. I'd love to have people call into the show. Like, I have a lot of ideas for it. It's just getting there is tough sometimes because it takes a lot of time. You guys don't see how much, but Newswave, man, like, I'll be up till like 1 or 2 a.m. editing this thing just to make sure it's live the next morning. So it's tough sometimes, it really is. But I put up on Twitter as of yesterday, I asked my boss if I could go to part-time. He was cool with that, but I did have to go to part-time now because I want to work more on YouTube. I really do. This is something I enjoy. You guys are really cool about stuff. You support me. So you know what? Let's go for it. Let's do YouTube. But yes, guys, that's pretty much all I can think of about me. Make sure you ask me questions down below because I will have a follow-up video for everything that I completely missed. I said before, I'm not good at talking about myself, and I miss stuff all the time. So go ahead and leave a comment below, ask me questions, and I'll answer it in a follow-up video, guys. So until then, I'll see you next time.